Now we want to explore complex failures. And I thought a way we could do this is I'm going to give you another example. And again, this is going to be one since we're on this aviation theme and NASA theme that comes from there. I have the distinct honor of having a very good friend of mine who was the chief astronaut at NASA. And he's one of the most experienced spacewalkers that
Wow.
NASA has ever produced. But when you think about spacewalks or what NASA calls EVAs, you don't think of them being inherently dangerous, but they were actually something that NASA and many of the observers around them feared, because when you think about constructing something like the ISS and all the spacewalks that you have to do, there are a million things that could go wrong. So it's amazing that for so many years, they had done thousands of hours of spacewalks without any major issues until my friend Chris happened to be on the ISS. And this was back in July of 2013. And on July 9th, he, an Italian astronaut, I'm going to butcher his name, but I think it's Luca Parmitano, went out to do an EVA and everything went flawless. But when they got back to the ISS, they noticed that the cap that Luca was wearing was wet. And they came to the conclusion that this was just sweat and it was his first spacewalk. So he was just nervous, etc. Well, a week later, July 16th, they go back out to do some additional maintenance, etc. Everything's going extremely
Yeah.
well. In fact, they're ahead of schedule 45 minutes into it when Luca reaches into a crevice to do some work and he notices that the moisture isn't just on his cap, but it's now in his helmet. And then Chris comes around to do a visual observation and sees a blob because they're in space. So it's a blob of liquid that's accumulating in his helmet. And
Oh.
then all of a sudden, NASA recognizes that the issue here is that Luca could drown. And so they immediately order an abort. But on his way back to the hatch, two things happen. One, they go from orbital day to orbital night. So all of a sudden, it's dark. And then two, there are all these precautions that they have to go through because they have to avoid any sharp objects. And one of these happened to be an antenna that's sticking out, and they can't puncture the suits or they'll decompress and die. Luca has to do this maneuver where he inverts himself. And when he does, this blob ends up covering his complete eyes, his nostrils, and half his mouth. So now he's barely able to breathe. And the blob doesn't go away when he comes back, it just stays there. So now he's completely blinded. And at this point, Chris has to help him get back into the ISS, which he does. They then get back in the hatch, and Chris has to calmly keep him from not overreacting as the water is accumulating even more. But they had to wait for 30 minutes of decompression before they can take out off the helmet. That is a long story. It turns out to have a successful outcome. And I think part of that was because not only astronaut training, but Chris was a Navy SEAL. And I think it was his training to be able to adapt in complex situations. But the important thing here is this complex failure could have been avoided if they were able to catch the small problem of water being on the cap before they did that second spacewalk. I illustrate that because oftentimes we don't look for these small problems. And why is it so important that we do before they spiral out of control, like that example?
Such a full and rich story, and it also just fills me with appreciation because you have been a very good and close reader of my book. You're referring in that story to so many concepts in the complex um, failure chapter, and one of which is what I call either ambiguous threats or the small signals that something might be wrong that we easily dismiss. It's easy to cognitively dismiss them. We just assume we have this overarching assumption that all is well. And in complex in complex systems, it's a very bad assumption to have. We have it, but then we have to override it. And so you're absolutely right. This complex and almost tragic failure was preceded by little signals, little hello, I'm here signals that were ignored, not because they're bad or lazy people, but because it's natural and normal as humans to assume them away. And what led to that breakdown was a variety of things, none of them on their own bad enough to cause the failure, but the accumulation of water inside the suit, the sharp objects that led to a need to alter their course and their behavior. And it sounds like a handful of other things that come together essentially in just the wrong way to let a failure through. Now, people who work in complex organizations or high risk organizations are trained, as your Navy SEAL colleague was, to be highly aware, to be not thinking, oh, yeah, we won't fail, but to be thinking, where might we fail? To be ever vigilant and ever heedful of those small signals. Now, they missed the small signal the first time, but fortunately, he was able to respond magnificently in action and prevent the far worse failure. But complex failures are on the rise. We live and work in increasingly complex environments. And so we have to train ourselves to be willing to raise, not worry about people thinking you're chicken little when you say, "Ooh, that doesn't look good." Oh, don't worry about that. Don't be a wimp. But actually praise and reward the people who are willing to speak up early so that we can head these complex failures off at the pass. The complexity of our systems is a given, but our ability to prevent most complex failures is much greater when we're more open and more attentive to those small signals. And by the way, when you said at the very beginning of that story, you said, we think of spacewalk as so routine. It's partly because NASA has trained us to think that. They've put forward an image of themselves as doing these things that now we can do them easily and do them in our sleep. Nonsense, right? These are extraordinarily challenging, risky, skillful activities that they do, and they should take credit for it.
Yeah, I think what we fail to realize is the 2 years of constant planning that they've done in a pool environment to get ready for that one event, just to make sure that they try to prevent everything that they can from going wrong.
Exactly right.